This is an oral history or interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
My name is Dana Eldridge. I live in East Orleans. I was born in Chatham.
All right, thank you. What was your early childhood like?
It was wonderful.
Can you describe it?
There were no restrictions. We had a little house on Monomoy that we went every weekend. As I came along, there was duck hunting, fishing, all the outdoor sports that you could imagine, and almost no restrictions. It was wonderful.
Can you describe your fondest childhood memory?
Fondest? I think it was when there's one other boy in my town, the little town I grew up in, South Chatham, and my grandmother had given me an old ratty quilt. So my friend and I would fill up a little bottle with water, each of us, take 4 or 5 sandwiches and head off into the woods. And we went down along the beaches, we went up in the marshes to dig clams and quahogs, and we'd often spend the night out there. And nobody cared. There was nothing to go wrong.
All right. What made you decide to go to war? If you weren't drafted, was there an influence?
It was right after World War II, and 3 of my uncles were in World War II, and they had come home to great rewards. None of them were killed, and I was going to college out in Amherst at Massachusetts, and pretty soon a little notice came in the mail, and it said, "Dear something, Mr. Eldridge," I guess. And then a hand reached out from in back of the woods, grabbed me and pulled me in.
Was anybody affected by you leaving, and what did you miss most?
Well, I had a girlfriend. I missed her, of course. But being in the Army, which I was an experience unlike anything I had ever seen before. There were things I didn't even realize existed. And I don't know, tell me just off record, where does this go?
Well, here, I can give you a copy. We tried to make it.
I mean, who gets this?
Oh,
Our school.
Our school.
Well, I can tell you some things. It was the first time in my life, at one point in the drafting process, they said, all those that can't read, go over here. And in the group of 150 or so, about 15 or 20 of the guys went over there. I never realized there were anybody around that couldn't read, and yet there were. I, at least, and I know a bunch of others, were quite embarrassed to be one. That's my wife.
Are you recording?
They can scratch it out. So when it came time, at one point we had to give a urine sample. And we're standing around in a room with maybe 150 other naked guys. First time ever that I had to. and because we were so embarrassed, an awful lot of us couldn't give a urine sample, so we found somebody that could, that wasn't quite as embarrassed. So we went up to him and he filled our sample bottles.
What do you remember most about going overseas?
Going overseas?
Yeah, what was it like?
Well, if you can imagine being on a 500-foot vessel, we shipped out of Tacoma, I think, West Coast, and almost everybody in that boat was probably from inland, because Tacoma's way up on the coast and it's rough up there in the Pacific Northwest. So you can imagine what happened when you get a bunch of kids. It was a little bit scared, a little bit apprehensive where we're going and so forth. And the boat started whoop and down and whoop and down. And pretty soon the contents of the stomach were up and down, up and out. It was god awful.
All right. Moving on to some other questions. How did the civilians of Korea treat you and your company?
Say that again?
How did the civilians of Korea treat you and your company?
We didn't see them very often. We were right up in the front lines most of the time. But the few people that we did see treated us wonderfully. We had, as a matter of fact, we had a company in one posting. We had a company of South Koreans right beside us. There was never any problem.
What was the landscape of Korea like? Did you enjoy it?
What do you mean, do you enjoy it? Combat. You don't enjoy combat. It's mountainous. It's just up and down mountains.
Yeah, besides the combat, did you enjoy the landscape and the look of it?
No. I didn't. It's just something we had. It's an unpleasant job, is what it amounted to. Terribly unpleasant.
Can you describe a normal day of trading? Were there any hard days? And if there were, can you describe them?
Who thought up these questions? Okay. Which question are we on? What number?
8.
Normal day of training?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was back here in the States. Well, they tried to keep us busy. There were 4 months of training, basic training, and you learned how to stick a bayonet in somebody, you learned how to shoot somebody, you learned how to kill them any way, or disable them any way you could. And were there any hard days? Yes, there were. Their idea was, I think, of the military brass, was to get us so we could stand it over in Korea. And it was very difficult.
Did you make any friends while in the military? And if you did, do you still know them?
I still correspond with my sergeant. That all these years later, he and I still talk on the phone.
How often do you talk?
Oh, it's 4 or 5 times a year. He's my age, so one of us is going to fall by the wayside pretty quick. But
what do you regret most about serving?
what do I resent?
Yeah.
Nothing.
You enjoy serving?
The Navy asked. The country asked me to serve. My uncles had served in the war 6 years before. It was my turn. That's all.
How did the other soldiers treat you?
It's funny, you hear questions like this, and when you're in combat, we're all in the same boat. And you like each other. You have to. You're depending on them sometimes for your life.
Was there, anyone who was hard on you?
Never.
It's like a family.
Hmm?
Everyone, you're like a family, a giant family, trying to really survive, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you describe your most vivid moment?
Yeah. A number of them.
Maybe 1 or 2? Yeah.
You know,
You're
I
okay.
had one, we were up on a mountain ridge somewhere, and some artillery rounds came in, and a guy not far from me had one leg blown off and the other leg was just dangling by a tendon, and I held him in my arms, but there was nothing you could do. There was so much blood pouring out, I couldn't do a thing. You just had to hold him while he died.
Can you describe the second one?
Another one was, we had called up, we weren't sure whether we could make it or not, if we had enough men, so we called up some reserve companies to come up and help us out. And We did get through the night, and when the daylight came, generally the Chinese backed up then. But when daylight came, we sort of looked at each other, because we were down in a trench, in a hooch, they called them, sandbagged hole in the ground. And somebody said, I wonder what happened to those two companies we called for. So we started looking around. We looked over the edge of a little cliff to the Bulldoze Road, which came up below us. And there were the two companies. And they were, it was the worst, one of the worst sights I've ever seen in my life. A man, John and I, my friend that I still correspond with, went down to see if we could help him. Who we could help. There were legs and heads and torsos scattered all around. And we saw one guy that was moving, so we picked him up, and his around some artillery thing, it severed his skin on his head, and maybe his head too. It was so bloody you couldn't tell. And all the skin in his face slumped down over his face, so it's all bunched up on his nose, his forehead had skin sticking down. And so I put his head between my legs, face down, so we could attack, we could see if we could do something about this wound. Of course, John and I didn't know anything about head surgery. And he kept trying to paw at me. He was conscious on some level. But when he clawed at me, his fingers had been cut off right here with a shrapnel. And so when he clawed, he reached up, those bones scraping over my hand. That was pretty bad.
What were the other soldiers like?
Soldiers. We were all about the same. We had pretty much a United Nations effort in the particular place I was. We had Chinese, Asian, we had black soldiers, we had just about any variety of American that you can think of. And we were all fighting for the same thing, to stay alive. So they looked all about the same. You never got to know them on a deep level.
Did you have to face any enemy soldiers face to face?
Never.
How was trench warfare? What were your opinions on it when you were in the trenches? Was it terrible?
Terrible. And the trenches first were often not terribly deep, maybe 4 feet deep or something. I'm 6'4", so I couldn't walk. I had to walk along, all hunched over. I remember one day we were going somewhere in a very shallow trench, another guy and I, and we kept sticking up above the trench, and finally one of the guys who was stationed was in a foxhole right me. You guys, get down! He said, you're drawing fire. There was some water and boom, boom, boom right behind us. It encouraged us to get low quickly.
What was the most interesting place you visited?
I don't know. Because we didn't know the names of any of these places. We were on a ridge called Heartbreak Ridge, and then we were shifted over to a thing we called Sandbag Castle. I don't know. I can't answer that question. Mostly because there's no names we could attach to these things except slang names.
Can you describe a moment if you did go into a civilian village, and what were the civilians like?
One, we never did. We did see civilians occasionally, and it's some abject poverty. It's the worst kind of poverty I would ever come in contact with. We had, when we went to the replacement depot, you go over, they put you in a replacement depot, and a few thousand men, and when a line company says, hey, we need 6 riflemen or whatever, they'd send back to the repo company, and you'd go up to your line company. while I was at that repo company, first time I've seen poverty so great. We had a mess hall with plenty of food, never any problem. Again, at that place. So you'd go through and get your food, and you'd go try to find somewhere to sit down to eat it. And then when you got through, if you didn't like the food, or maybe it was too much or something, you go over to the garbage can and dump it. In that country, at that time, you didn't dump your food because there was a 5 or 6 year old kid standing in the garbage can waiting for you to dump something. And he had a bunch of friends hanging around the outside of that garbage can. He'd collect it and give it to his friends. No, I never saw anything like that. I never hoped to see anything like that. And it's really real poverty.
Well, do you know how many kids? Maybe a number?
What are you talking about?
A number of kids by the trash can, maybe like 3 to 4?
Well, in the fighting, none. This is just in the repo depot.
Yeah. How many kids were in the
Well,
restaurant?
what do I know? There seemed to be a lot of them. Because there must have been a village somewhere outside. We were encircled with barbed wire. But these young kids, and they're small, came through that barbed wire like eels through a large mesh net. They didn't even slow them down. And they'd come in and get our stuff. They'd get our garbage, and then they'd sneak out through the barbed wire fence and back into wherever their village was. That's all I know.
How was your family when you returned from the war?
How was my family? They were fine. What do you mean? They were fine.
Like,
Happy to see me come back in one piece.
what career did you partake in when you came back?
What did you say? What field?
What career did you partake
Because I'd had 2 years of college prior to being drafted, I now had the GI Bill, which is a educational stipend for living through the war. So I went back to college and finished up my wildlife management training.
And what was college like after the war?
University of Mass.
What was it like? Did you see any veterans in the college?
Oh, sure. We were all, at least in the place where I was, they put us all the veterans together. We didn't look much older than the kids who were going, but we felt 100 years older. And so they wisely put us all together. There were 20, in this particular dormitory, I think there were 22 of us or 28 of us or something, that they put all on one floor and all in one section. So we didn't have to deal with these younger kids.
If you had a choice to go back, would you?
Not on your life.
Why not?
I mean, if there was a crisis in the country, yes. But, oh, what do you mean, go back to Korea?
Yeah.
I thought about it a number of times, but then I wondered, yeah, probably not.
What influenced you to write a book on your trip overseas?
Well, I grew up here on the Cape, as you probably know, and it dawned on me somewhere along the line that I didn't know a heck of a lot about what went on here on the Cape, because my father, of that era, mostly children were to be seen and not heard, and preferably not heard. And so he never said much to me about growing up here in the Cape. So when I got of an age where I was out of my teaching job, I wrote a book about growing up on Cape Cod, and then I wrote another book about a little further along in my life, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll write about my experiences overseas.
Where did the influence of was it your great
My grandfather was a writer, Grandfather Nickerson.
Did he inspire you in any way?
Just by the fact he did it. I would also call myself an avid reader, so it wasn't a huge jump to writing.
Is there any moment with your military training that it proved useful in everyday life?
Probably, and that's all I can say. Nothing in particular.
Did the military give you any interests? And what are they? If they did.
No, no. You, as a career? No, no, it didn't.
What do you think of people calling the Korean War the Forgotten War?
I guess it was.
Can you,
My country asked me to do something. I did it. That was, I don't know whether it's just a particularly Cape Cod way of doing things or what, but I know it. And keep in mind, all my examples were just 5 or 6 years older than I that had been in the Second World War. The country said, "Come, help us," and they did. I did too.
were there any, when you were fighting, were there any World War II veterans with you?
Not that I think there was one that I can remember clearly.
Do you know what happened to him?
No, I didn't keep in touch with him. He was a kind of a grizzled Southern, I'm sure, soldier, career soldier. Tough guy.
Back to the book.
Yeah.
With your great-great-grandfather, I believe, right? Ebenezer?
Yes.
Did he have an influence on you going? And anything about writing the book either?
As a matter of fact, I didn't even know he existed. When my mother died, she was 90-something, she gave me a diary, which I didn't know she had, of this guy had written in the Civil War.
Wow.
Pretty neat.
Can you tell us a little bit about him? And
Well, he was a carpenter. He grew up in Howard. And his 2 brothers volunteered for the war, the Civil War, of course, and he was, among the siblings, he was the only one that was married, and he had a 5 or 6-year-old daughter, Eveline, and he volunteered to go in, and he was the only one of all of his family that got mortally wounded. He's buried right over in Howard. Ebenezer Smalley. No, I don't.
all right. Jared, do you have another?
You're full of questions, you know.
I think that's it.
Lynn?
Yeah.
Come in here with a quart of ice cold water and pour it on this guy's head.
He was thirsty.
All right. We need to keep this going for a few more minutes. I need to think of a question.
You have to do this on Christmas vacation, huh?
Yeah, I know. Seeing as you're going away and everything.
Mhm.
So, what do you think? So you're a writer, obviously. That's what you do for a living currently.
No, I
you-
don't.
did you-
It's just a hobby.
Did you think about writing any other books?
I'd like to. I would like to write one about how I feel about this woman out here. She won't let me, though.
All right. Jared, anything else?
Nope.
Is this something the schools give you, these tablets?
Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah, we have to keep this going for another, I believe, 7 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
6 minutes now. Is there anything you can tell us that would expand on this?
Well, is there anything you'd like to say to future generations about war? Maybe about life?
Well, I'm 84, and I consider myself extremely lucky in just about all respects. I lived through the war, as most of us did. I've got 3 boys of my own. Consequently, I got grandchildren. It's been a very rewarding and fulfilling life. No.
Have any of your children served in the war? Oh,
No.
war?
No, they missed them. They missed all 3 of the kids. They're about a year apart. They're in the early 50s now, and they were lucky enough not to be nailed, drafted, and keep in mind that when I went in the service, it was the thing to do. After Vietnam, it was not necessarily the thing to do because it's kind of an ill-conceived war that we didn't need to fight. And so it's quite different now. I'm an old geezer. When I speak of the war, I was in the Civil War.
Speaking of the Vietnam War, what do you think about the way that veterans coming out of the Vietnam War were treated?
I don't know much about them. I've heard it's pretty bad. That's all I know about it. All, not necessarily Vietnam. I guess all veterans.
Well, did you get any remarks about being in the Korean War?
Did I get any what?
Remarks from anyone?
It was a forgotten war. When the World War II guys came home, there were parades, yeah, yeah. And when the Korean guys came home, it was, see you later, Charlie. Although we came home in a troop ship from the west coast of Korea, all the way to Hawaii, through the Panama Canal, up the Hudson, and there was a fireboat display. We were the first division to come home, the 45th Division, and the war was ended by then, and there were about 1,000 of us that had points enough to come home. So they had a great big display of fireboats shooting off. Then they marched us up somewhere in New York, ticker tape parade. Then they said, "You can go home, guys." I was out of there like a rocket.
How old were you when you got out of the Korean War?
Maybe 22. I would guess 22.
Did you ever think about going into the Vietnam War?
You kidding? This isn't something you seek out. I don't anyway. I did my job. The next generation do theirs. No, I didn't. That was the furthest thing from my mind.
What did you first think of when it started?
What?
The Vietnam War.
Well, at first I didn't pay a lot of attention, but the more rabble-rousing there was, I began to think of it more and more. And I've come to realize it was a war we didn't need to fight. All those men died for nothing.
Speaking outside, were you stationed anywhere interesting other than Korea?
No.
No place?
We went back, when you're on the front lines, after you've been on the front lines so many months, or you accumulate, the way you came home in those days was, if you had 36 points, you were eligible to come home. And you got 2 points for being way in the back line a month. You got 3 points a month if you were within range of artillery, and you got 4 points a month if you were in combat. I was getting 4 points a month, so when my 36 months were over, I was over. And we all looked, how many points have I got? How many points have I got? And you knew within a nanosecond when that 36 point came up, because, hey, I want to go home.
Do you mind if we go back to training for a few minutes?
That's right.
So while you were training, after I read most of your book, I heard that you found a clever way to get out of it.
I did a couple of stupid things. The last thing, at least in my day, that they did in basic was you went out on a bivouac. This is in the dead of winter in Pennsylvania. Cold, mountainous, and the tents that they gave us to use were left over from the Civil War, I think. They leaked. They were horrible tents. And we had to go through some really rigorous training. And I thought I knew where we were in relation to our home base, the cots would be sleeping on. And they had marched us around. I said, I know what we can do. They said, we'll just hang back when everybody's leaving. And there was 2 other squad leaders. We can go across this shut. It won't be such a long walk. We'll be home, we'll be dried. You have a hot shower, it'll be great. Well, everybody left, and in the confusion, The four of us were sitting there, and it was obviously dark. There was not near anything. It was out in the woods. So we started to walk. We didn't have a compass. And it was kind of an overcast night, so we didn't have a lot of guidance as to which way we're going, or even if we're going the same way. Well, we walked through the woods with our pack, a rifle, helmet's 3 pounds, the rifle's 10 pounds, pack probably weighed 30 or 40 pounds. And all the branches are covered with water. So when you're walking along that rain, it isn't raining, but it's dripping on you all the time. And the pack got heavier and heavier. And we began to wonder, we're lost. We don't know where the hell we are. And we stumbled on a bunch of loggers. So there was a little tiny trailer there. It wasn't so tiny. There were 3 or 4 guys in it playing cards in the middle of the night. And we said, can you give us an idea of where Indian Town Gap is? Yeah, right back that way, boys. What are you doing? And we told him, well, good luck to you, he said. And eventually, this was supposed to, we left the camp area, say at 8 o'clock, pitch dark. I was going to get us back by 9, get way ahead of the guys. Well, we got back at 1. Everybody that had started out was in bed, they'd showered, they were sleeping warm. We got to the barracks, and the top sergeant was waiting for us. Where you boys been? He said, well, we got kind of lost. He said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, tomorrow morning, he said, we have about 500 toothbrushes down at the main office. Why don't you show up there and you can clean our front steps with toothbrushes. That's what we did. But they couldn't do much because we were shipping out very, very soon. But it's easy to do stupid things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time and everything. And
good. I'm glad I had a chance to meet you both.
Also, thank you for your service.
Yes.
Yeah. Not many people say that, but if you do, thank you.
All right.
Oh, good questions, you guys. Did you have a chance?